What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? Today we're here once again with Brenda Smith Lezama. She was at the Building Bridges conference in Atlanta. We did a short interview with her, and we wanted to speak to her once again because we talked about a few topics about Afro Latinos, and she definitely represents that community. So, Brenda, thank you for joining us on the show today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
So, Brenda, since we last saw you, how things been going for you?
Things have been going well. I mean, I think January is always a difficult month in the year because we're always trying to kind of one up ourselves from the year before. So things are going really well. Work is going well, and I'm always trying to plan the next big move. So right now, I'm hitting it hard with the speaking, and I'll be announcing a few cool things coming up here this week.
All right, so based off of the last time that we talked, and maybe you had a chance to read some of the comments or different things you may wanted to address, maybe some misconceptions that people had. Did you see any comments that you possibly wanted to respond to, or maybe respond to some misconceptions?
To be honest, I didn't really spend a lot of time going through the comments on from your site, and but I did get a lot of messages. I had a lot of people contacting me on social media and wanting to continue the conversation afterwards. So that was something that I loved. Something that did come up that was a little bit, I think, jarring but understandable is the concept of, well, what does it mean to be Black? You know, a lot of people were saying, well, you know, it's all nice and everything that you're saying it sounds good. But does that really mean that Afro-Latinos are Black? And I understand that a lot of people don't necessarily seem to believe that, especially, you know, people coming into my DMs and trying to have a respectful conversation about it, but disagreeing. But that's what I think is interesting about the African diaspora in general. I feel like in the United States, we often have this conception of the African diaspora starting and ending in the United States when that's not the case.
Right. So they wanted for you to define what Blackness is to you, or they just want to say that, well, you're not Black. What is it they were homing in on?
The majority of the comments that were disagreeing with what I had to say were just saying, well, I don't think you're Black. I don't think that you really qualify. And then I had half the people were saying, thank you for representing Black people in this way. Thank you for representing Afro-Latinos in this way. Thank you for starting this conversation. So I think it's a little bit of both. And I feel like growing up in the South, it's something that has always been a little bit of a circumstantial thing. You know, when I went to school and nobody knew I spoke Spanish, you know, it wasn't really a question. But then when people would come home and meet my parents and they would say, wait, your dad has an accent. Where is that accent from? So my dad was raised in Panama, but he has a Jamaican a grandmother. So he kind of has a little bit of a Caribbean accent. People are like, wait, so he has this weird kind of Spanish, kind of Caribbean, kind of, what is that? Does that really mean he's Black? Then he's not Black. So that's one of the first times that I really started realizing that there was a little bit of confusion, number one. And number two, there was this doubt that people had upon my identity, which then made me doubt my identity back when I was in middle school. You know, that was the first time that I remember going through that.
Right. I mean, there are, some differences, yes, because we was, in different areas. For instance, when you mention, you say everything in the United States, we're kind of branded as the, representation of what Blacks are. Even not even on a continent, they aren't the representatives. You say Black people, African American people come up, you talk about all the celebrities and the guys who've done things in sports or innovation, etc. And some of our identity, unfortunately, was told to us by, the colonizer, right? And because some of it is told through that lens, you have some people, and some, it's not that many, but some in our community that will reject anything outside of, African American, right? But we are very vast, and that's why I like to study the transatlantic slave trade and find out everywhere we ever dropped off, right? So if you could, do you identify, just for those people, ask the question, do you
Yes,
identify as a Black woman?
absolutely. I always have.
Okay,
I
so
always have. And it wasn't until other people started telling me, well, I don't really think that you fit into that, that I started asking myself, wait, then where does my identity lie? But I think that was, obviously when you're coming up, you have a lot of situations that are going to make you question who you are as a person, not just in terms of race, but, you know, just growing up and trying to come into your own. But that was the first time that I felt the need to become educated on my history. And I felt the need to become educated on the people that came before me so that I could kind of explain to myself, okay, this is my path. This is how I got here.
Right. And when you look at, you know, and I've been looking into this a lot more with the Afro Latinos, whether they're in Mexico, Central America, South America. I just done a story the other day about Portugal,
Mm-hmm.
and black people are treated the exact same way
Mm-hmm.
everywhere. You know,
Yeah.
it's not like we get a pass somewhere. So when it comes to Afro Latinos, I was listening to this documentary and speaking about the caste system that
Mm-hmm.
the Spaniards and Portuguese instituted in their society. So, and then you touched on this before, maybe you can expound on this. You have someone that look like me and say, oh, I'm
Mm-hmm.
not black, I'm
Mm-hmm.
Dominican, or I'm not black. Like, what is the issue? Like, why
Well,
would they refuse to accept black?
Well, I think that the first thing is that a lot of times in Latino society, there has been this rejection of Black culture. You know, you talked about Dominican. Why is it that sharing the island of Hispaniola, the Dominican Republic, and Haiti has such a huge divide? Where there has even been a point in time where it is my understanding that Haitians or people who were born on the Dominican side of the island who were of Haitian descent were told, you know what, you don't have Dominican citizenship. You need to return to Haiti, even though, you know, you might have grown up there, you might have been born there, but there's this hatred towards that identity. You know, I think it's very common for Latinos to identify, for example, as costeños, which means coastal people, or morenos, which is referring to a dark brown skin tone, anything before they identify as a Black person. But I think that with social media, a lot of that is changing because we have the access to be able to get on online and realize how a lot of our traditional dances are pretty much, if not directly derivative, or at least have some type of similarities to a lot of local dances in different parts of Africa. And you start to realize, wait, this language or this dialect sounds a lot like this other one from this part of Africa, or the food, or the, you know, the customs. And you start to realize that a lot of our Blackness as Afro-Latinos is rooted in Africanism. We just, as an Afro-Latino society, have not always acknowledged that.
So, what would it take for them to look in the mirror and say, wait a minute, I'm a black person, I'm an African person? Because I was watching how some of them try to say, oh, well, I have this kind of hair, so I'm not like you. And someone
Mm-hmm.
that has maybe what they call 4C hair say, oh, well,
Mm-hmm.
you're really black. You got that kinky hair. You know,
Mm-hmm.
like, what is it going to take? Because in this system of global white supremacy, we all treated the same.
Well, that's the thing, is breaking that down. I think that that's the number one thing, is breaking that down. And in Mexico, for example, Mexico, I think last I saw, the last statistics that I saw, it was about 1% Black. So it's not something that people see all the time, whereas somewhere in, like in the Dominican Republic, Blackness is all around you. So I think that number one, it depends on the country, because realistically, every single country from Mexico to the Dominican Republic to Brazil, the Afro-Latino communities are completely different. In Mexico, for example, they're physically marginalized. They are located around coastal areas and primarily around the edges of the country, whereas in other parts, they're just all over the place. So I think that understanding that it's going to be different, it's going to be a different process for each group and each country. That's the first thing. But the second thing is, just like here in the United States, is, or in, you know, in the UK, or all these places where we have these movements of people standing up and saying, you know what, I'm not really down to let revisionist history tell me about myself anymore. And actually, I'm in the process of starting to look into going back to grad school. And what I want to do, I would love to go back to Clark and study. I studied at a PWI. And yeah, I studied Black Studies, but I studied Black Studies at a PWI. I want to go back to Clark and study at an HBCU and see what exactly it is that I can learn about myself and about my history from people who look like me.
Right. So if you mentioned that the brothers and sisters in Mexico are marginalized and
Mm-hmm.
they're treated bad, and we, like I said, everywhere we're at in the world, someone having an issue with us. But here in America, we have stood up to a lot, and we still standing up
100%.
now. We know, like I said, I guess we just that warrior tribe. We ain't no punks here,
Hmm.
much as they try to beat us down. But why is it that we haven't seen a mass movement of the Afro Latinos standing up and saying, "Hey, we're not gonna take this crap"?
Well, like I said, I can only speak to my experiences, and so having grown up in Mexico, I grew up back and forth between Mexico City and South Georgia. I can talk about my experiences there.
Hmm.
And I know that in a lot of parts of Mexico, for example, Oaxaca is one of the places where most Afro Latinos are very heavily um, marginalized. And those are communities that are often, coming from low socioeconomic backgrounds. They may not always have access to electricity all of the time. They may not always have access to cell phone service and internet all of the time. It's not like it's not there, but it's just not as easily accessible as it would be, in other communities. So I think that the division between Afro-Latino communities themselves, just spatially, is one of the main things. But the fact that they tend to kind of stick to themselves and almost live, isolated from the rest of the general society. Now, for the people who are living day to day in Mexico City or places like that, I think the fact that most people in Mexico, for example, when I walk around with my dad, I remember he would always tell me stories about how the little kids would just always come up and touch his hair because they'd never seen anybody like him. And even today, when you have, so many prominent Black musicians and rappers and actors and whatever, people still look at him and they're like, wait, can I touch your hair? Because, I've never seen things like that. I've never seen somebody like that in person. Or, for example, I actually made a friend the other day, and she said, you know what? I've never really actually met a Black person. Like, can I ask you some things? Like, will you be offended if I ask you certain questions? And I said, you know what? Ask me anything. Because I think that exposure is going to be the first step to bridging that gap.
So in the 21st century, you basically what you're saying is there are people that cut off where they're asking you questions about Black people.
100%. 100%. I actually just got done working in Miami for the last 6 months. Miami. We're not talking the middle of nowhere. We're talking Miami. I met a girl who, just flat out had to ask me all of these questions about Black people, and she was so afraid of offending me. But I said, you know what? I think it's bizarre to me that you've never met a Black person living in a big city in Mexico. We're both working in Miami, where she's from a big city in Mexico, as am I, and you've never met somebody that looks that different to you. So I think that we have to acknowledge the fact that there is a lack of education, and that's not an excuse, but I think it is an explanation, because sometimes we can't educate ourselves unless we know what to educate ourselves on.
Now you mentioned earlier about the Afro Latinos in Mexico being marginalized. I mean, could you expound on that? Like they're prevented with essential services, like what they're actually doing to them to marginalize them.
What I mean is like the physical marginalization. I mean that literally Afro-Latino communities are found on the periphery of the country. So it's not always super common to find, for example, communities of Afro-Latinos or large communities of Afro-Latinos living in the heart of Mexico City or in the heart of Guadalajara or whatever it may be. I'm not saying that it doesn't exist, but I'm saying that you have to remember, Mexico is about 1% Afro-Latino, 1% Black. So the majority of that 1% is located around the coast.
What is even though they're low in population, but I've heard other people like this straight from Mexico say this is that there is a particular racism against
Mm-hmm.
Black people. Now the question I'm gonna ask you is, what did Black people do to them to cause that?
Absolutely nothing.
Okay,
From my point of view.
so
I think that it is something that has been passed along so much. I actually have somebody in my family who at one point was staying with us, and I found a journal that had been written, talking about all these racial slurs and referring to my dad, in derogatory ways, and he would refer to himself as white. And I would say, you are Latino who is a descendant most realistically, you're probably a descendant of a mix of Native and Spanish ancestors, but you want to identify so badly as white and denigrate somebody who is Black. Why? Because that's what's been taught. That's what's been taught. So I think that after exposure, the next thing would be education. But like I said, a lot of people don't go out and try to educate themselves on that and try to even just reach out to their neighbor and say, all right, what does make me so different from you? You know, and I feel like to me and you, that might be so basic. To me and you, that may be everyday life. To me and you, that might just be like common sense. But you realize really quickly that common sense is not so common.
Well, let's talk about that, because that's a common problem here in the United States. And I hear this a lot, and even my wife has discussed this with me. Where does it come from? Why, people who identify themselves as Latino, they can have dark hair, they can even be your color, but they want to call themselves white? Because at the end of the day, white folks, the ones that don't care for them too much, they want to build a wall to keep them out. So yet they want to identify and say they're white. Why? And what kind of prize they're going to get by doing that?
Well, speaking from my own experiences, in Mexico, for example, you can walk around and find jobs that very blatantly discriminate based on age. You can find jobs that will blatantly discriminate based on race. And even if it's just working at a store or working at a laundromat, you'll see the signs handwritten, but they'll say, we don't want XYZ type of person. And that's something that is not just in politics, that's not just in movies, and that's not just in the mass media, that's everyday life. I remember walking in where my apartment is located. I remember walking across the street to a laundromat and, asking if, they were looking for, if they had any part-time work. And they said, yeah, we do. Here's the sign. And the first thing was age. They said, well, we won't hire anybody younger than 40. Sometimes it's we won't hire anybody older than 40. Sometimes it's we want white passing Mexicans. And it's not like here where you can just, if that happened, it would be an immediate lawsuit. If that happened here, it would be all over social media and it would be a controversy and the company would probably be forced to apologize, because here it's something that's so under the table, or not maybe so under the table, but it's something that just isn't said. It happens, but it isn't blatantly said to your face. Whereas in Mexico, it can be.
Right. And what you just stated, why you have lawsuits in America due to that? Because Black Americans put in the work, the blood, sweat, and tears to fight against discrimination practices in hiring. Okay.
Absolutely.
So our issue as Black Americans, and which more Black Americans are getting on this now, is that when people come in, and you can think about this, Black Americans is the ones that fought for other non-white groups to come into this country as well. Because at one point in time, this country would not allow no one in here but white folks, period. If you're not from Europe, then you're not coming in. So since that advantage is used very well, the affirmative action, whatever else, why is it that when some people may come over, not all, but some come over, and they want to look down on Black Americans when you wouldn't have the opportunity to come in here if it wouldn't been for Black Americans?
I would say that a lot of that is rooted in this Eurocentric society, and it's everything from beauty standards to, the most basic things are rooted in that Eurocentric mentality, right? So, yeah, you can talk about it from that point of view, but, I think about it from the point of view of little girls. Why is it that so many little girls still, I get the messages that I get most frequently is usually from moms who say, hey, I'm having issues with my daughter. She's getting picked at school. She hates how she looks. I don't know what to tell her. Can you help me talk to her? That's the most common message that I get on my social media. So why is it that from a very young, from the time that you're, elementary school age, or even younger, you already have this Eurocentric standard. And that's something that's pervasive throughout our entire society, not just in beauty, not just in hiring practices, not just in politics. It's something that transcends every aspect of our society.
So let me ask you a question. I don't know if you paid attention to this because I've seen it. Literally, you mentioned the Eurocentric beauty standard, but
Mm-hmm.
you do realize that that standard is just about dead now, and now like the beauty standard is more so how black women look, or even women that's in Latin countries, that derived from Africans. You do realize like more. I don't know if you've seen the pictures that came out with the black fishing. Did you see that?
100%, yeah.
Okay, and they're not trying to look like themselves at all. They're trying to get injections to get your color and everything else. So what are they going to do due to this new beauty standard that's out, and being more and more accepted? Because the Kim Kardashians of the world, etc. They're not trying to look like a traditional white woman.
But I would actually argue a small part of what you just said.
Okay.
I think that as a whole, I agree with what you're saying. The beauty standard is changing. But I would not say that Eurocentric beauty standard is dead. Because you look at somebody like Kim Kardashian, you look at the Kylie Jenners of the world, and you're going to have people praising their body type. You're going to have people saying how cool, how fashionable. But you have somebody like Nicki Minaj or Cardi B wear the exact same thing or do the exact same thing or pose the exact same provocative way. And they're going to say, oh, well, that's trashy. That's ghetto. Why? It's the same exact thing. It's the same exact hairstyle, the same exact clothes, the same exact pose, but it's perceived completely differently from my point of view.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, but let's talk about those women you just mentioned. They got their lips injected to match black women.
Absolutely.
They got butt jobs. They got all these things because you remember Kylie. Nobody was checking for Kylie. You know
100%.
that until she got all that work done. Now, I'm gonna say that's a racial thing propped up by white supremacy because yes, they'll say, "Oh, braids on a black woman is ugly," but when Kylie do it, oh, it's so daring. You get what I'm saying? They trying to maintain that, but still at the end of the day, they're copying. So I'm just trying to understand how to break down this ideology that is in certain Afro countries where our people are at. You get what I'm saying? Because I don't agree with even I think Amara La Negra talked about that. Like, oh, you don't want to get married to nobody black because you're gonna mess up the bloodline. And this bloodline conversation that comes up too. I mean, is they want to be white so bad that that's what it is, or what?
To the bloodline situation, I couldn't completely speak on that. But in terms of where do we draw the line, I almost feel like for a lot of people, a lot of problematic people, the line stops at actually being black. So you see these women on social media and yeah, they borrow. Yeah. It goes back to, even things like colorism. Somebody like me is going to get a much different reaction than somebody who has like your complexion, for example. And that's not okay. But I think that a lot of that goes back to these white women or non-black women or women who are just not women of color can borrow the hairstyles, the trends, the outfits, everything. But the line stops at being black. Like, did we not forget how Cardi B was perceived when she came out? Of course, she had a lot of different things coming on, but I don't know. I just feel like people can be perceived a lot differently once they're on the other side of that line.
Yeah, I agree with you about colorism because let's say if Cardi B was my color, like you said, they wouldn't receive her as they do, and she couldn't get away with all of the things that she get away with. I agree with you 100%. Colorism is definitely a real issue all over the place, but it's just a symptom of racism and white supremacy. So,
Yeah.
Brenda,
Yes.
what you have next on the line for maybe some speaking engagements or what people could possibly check out with you?
Yeah. So I am actually going to be touring this year, doing a bunch of speaking engagements, and I will be announcing most likely this week that I have started working with a speakers agency to help fulfill that. But most importantly for me, this is something that I just kind of have decided, and I'm not sure if it'll be for this year or it'll be for the future, but I definitely want to go back to school. I definitely want to go back to school and I studied Black Studies in college, like I told you, but I'm very interested in studying more about Africana women's issues and becoming more educated on that. I also don't want to just look at it from, like you said, a U.S. point of view. I want to look at it from a more global point of view and see what work I can do that can help me connect back to my roots in Africa. My family has been trying to trace back our family tree for I don't even know, about 10 years now, and we still have not been able to figure out where exactly in Africa our country, our family stems from. So that's something that I think is really important and meaningful to me. And I work a lot abroad, but I think it's time for me to reconnect with the African continent.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. We should be trying to connect, and that's something that I definitely believe in. I think maybe I'm just off the cuff with this, but you probably will be on a tour later on this year, correct? If everything finalizes, correct?
We're still in talks, yeah, but
Okay.
hopefully that'll come to fruition as well.
Okay, yeah. Everyone's still in talks. Guys, we are trying to do a 6 city tour possibly. So we'll let you guys know about that. We're not talking in code. We just talking out loud about a few things. But I'll get you guys some information on that. How can they get in contact with you on social media, just in case there's a question they have for you that I did not ask?
Absolutely. You can reach me on my social media at Brenda Smith Lezama, and you want to stick that in the description box. I'm most active on Instagram, so that's probably the best way to reach me. And I'm always open to continuing conversation. I think that one of the most important things that anybody can say is I don't know. So I'm always open to learning more, to continuing conversations, and I hope you guys join me over there.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, make sure you check out the social media for Brenda. Follow her and just ask some questions. Now, like I said, we're not asking people to contend with her. We all still learning and growing. I feel that we are a very vast people. We have a lot of learning to do with each other. So let's just learn and grow, and that's just kind of how we want to present things as a global African diaspora channel. So Brenda, thank you for joining us on the show today.
Thank you.